Imagine this. You wake up in the morning, sunlight leaking through your curtains, and yet there's a weight, not a physical one, but something internal. It's quiet, persistent, and familiar. You stretch, scroll, sip your coffee, but underneath it all is a dull hum that whispers, "You're behind. You're not there yet. You're not enough. You did everything right, at least that's what you were told. You got the degree. You're chasing the job. You smile in photos. You're productive, grateful, even. So why does it still feel like you're falling short in a game you never signed up to play? This feeling isn't sharp, it doesn't scream. It lingers. It clings like smoke after a fire, even though you can't find the flames. Every success feels like a fluke. Every compliment feels mistaken. You're terrified someone will figure out you're faking it. You wonder how others do it, how they seem so certain, so at home in themselves, while you quietly wonder if you're just inherently flawed. And worst of all, you can't even tell if this is your own voice or something you inherited long before you could think for yourself. Here's the paradox. You work harder, strive more, push further, yet the more you achieve, the more distant enough feels. The goalpost moves, the bar rises. You become a prisoner of your own perfection. It's not that you're failing, it's that no success ever feels final. No validation ever fills the void. What is that void? Where did it come from? Why, in a world obsessed with self-love and affirmation, do so many people feel like imposters in their own lives? Is it childhood, culture, capitalism? Is it trauma dressed in ambition? Is it the echo of a parent's disapproval, a teacher's shrug, a society that monetizes your insecurities before you even recognize them? Or is it something deeper, something metaphysical, the spiritual wound of a soul torn between who it is and who it was told to be? You start to notice the patterns, the way you sabotage yourself before someone else can, the way you downplay your wins to avoid envy, the way you keep performing, hoping that one more yes from the outside world will silence the no inside your head. But it never does. And here's the deeper question. What if this feeling of not enough isn't a flaw in you, but a feature of something larger, something systemic, something ancient? What if you've spent your whole life trying to treat a symptom, while the root cause remains buried in silence? What if feeling not enough isn't a personal failure, but the logical result of a culture built on comparison, perfectionism, and performance? What if you were never meant to feel good enough, not because you're broken, but because you're being measured by a ruler that was never designed for you? What if your wound is not your weakness but your teacher? Now stop, breathe, notice what you're feeling right now. Discomfort, resonance, a strange sense of familiarity. That's the edge. That's the tension where transformation begins. Because this isn't just about self-esteem or confidence. This is existential. This is about how you've been conditioned to relate to your own existence. It's about identity, worth, survival, and meaning. It's not about simply loving yourself more. It's about asking, who taught you that you weren't enough in the first place? And why did you believe them? What systems benefited from your self-doubt? What would your life look like if you didn't carry this silent hunger for external approval? And here's the most haunting question of all. If you suddenly felt enough without needing to prove, please, or perform, who would you be then? Let that question linger, because in the next section, we're going to excavate the origin of this psychological wound. We'll go beneath the surface to the tangled roots of childhood conditioning, societal expectations, and the philosophical machinery that keeps millions quietly suffering under the weight of never being enough. But before we go there, ask yourself this. When did you first learn to doubt your own worth? And who benefited when you did? Let's go back not to a moment, but to a pattern. Somewhere in your earliest memories, before you could name your emotions or defend your dignity, there was a moment when you realized love could be earned or lost. Maybe it was a glance, a sigh, a subtle withdrawal. Maybe someone didn't scream, they simply looked disappointed. And in that space between their silence and your confusion, a message took root. You are only worthy when you meet expectations. You didn't have the language for it then, but your nervous system remembered. Every smile you earned, every frown you avoided, shaped your sense of self. You began to edit yourself for approval, perform for connection, suppress for survival. This is where it begins. Not with trauma that announces itself like a thunderclap, but with quiet disconnections that seem ordinary, praise that only comes with performance, affection that's conditional, identity that forms as a mirror not of who you are, but of who they needed you to be. Carl Jung once wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." You inherited more than just genes, you inherited expectations, fears, and wounds. And perhaps most insidiously, you inherited their definition of enough. In a world obsessed with outcomes, you became an object to be evaluated by grades, by behavior, by appearance, by productivity. You learned to associate your worth with your usefulness. You weren't simply loved, you were assessed. The culture reinforced it. School turned curiosity into competition. Social media turned self-expression into performance. Advertisers told you that happiness was always one purchase away, and every algorithm trained you to crave likes over truth, followers over depth, visibility over authenticity. What no one told you was that this wasn't personal. It was structural. Nietzsche would call this the morality of the herd. He warned of the soul-deep damage that occurs when we allow external structures, be they religious, political, or cultural, to define what is valuable in us. In his view, modern man is often a domesticated creature afraid to deviate, programmed to obey, and addicted to approval. Man is more eat than many of the apes, he quipped, noting how our desperate need to belong often buries our deepest truths. Arthur Schopenhauer, more bleakly, argued that life itself is suffering, and our constant striving is a form of self-deception. We chase after goals, achievements, relationships, only to realize that fulfillment is always delayed, or worse, an illusion. And then there's Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz and emerged with a different vision. He didn't believe in avoiding suffering. He believed in redeeming it by finding meaning within it. When we are no longer able to change a situation, he said, we are challenged to change ourselves. So, what are we changing? We are changing how we define the self. Most people never question the template they're given. They spend their entire lives chasing validation in a system that profits from their insecurity. They measure themselves by standards they didn't choose, then blame themselves for falling short. It's like trying to win a race you never agreed to run, on a track designed to exhaust you. This is the hidden problem. We internalize systems of judgment as if they were truths about the soul. But a child raised to please becomes an adult afraid to exist. And here's where psychology collides with philosophy. Modern cognitive science tells us that early emotional neglect wires the brain for hypervigilance. The amygdala, our fear center, overreacts to rejection. Even when none is present, the brain seeks patterns. And if the pattern it learned was I am only safe when I am approved of, it will sacrifice authenticity for security again and again. Add to this the dopamine-driven loops of digital life where every notification is ahead of temporary relevance, and you have a recipe for chronic dissatisfaction. Your mind becomes a battlefield, your worth a performance, and yet, the most haunting part, you might not even realize it's happening. You've called it ambition, drive, work ethic, hustle, but deep down, it's often fear of being ordinary, forgotten, exposed. The psychologist Gabor Mate reminds us that trauma isn't what happens to you, it's what happens inside you as a result. It's the disconnection from the self that occurs when being yourself becomes unsafe. This disconnection is the root. You were taught that being loved requires being good, that being valuable means being useful, that being seen means being exceptional. But what if none of that is true? What if you were enough before you ever proved anything? What if the original wound, the sense of not enoughness, is not a flaw in your soul, but a symptom of a world that forgot how to love unconditionally? Let's ask one more dangerous question. If everything you believed about being enough was a lie told to control you, what would it mean to stop believing it? What would you lose? And more importantly, what would you reclaim? Let's explore the unseen consequences. How this invisible force doesn't just affect you personally, but silently shapes the structure of society, our relationships, and the very definition of success. See how deeply this wound runs, and why escaping it is not only personal, it's revolutionary. It's easy to believe that the feeling of not being enough is personal, that it's just your low self-esteem, your overthinking, your need for approval. But what if the feeling is not a personal flaw but a symptom of something larger? What if the entire system is designed to make you feel that way? Imagine this, a society in which everyone wakes up and, before even touching the floor, feels the silent weight of insufficiency. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just subtle enough to keep them moving, just painful enough to make them spend, just chronic enough to make them strive, always striving. Not because they're free, but because they're afraid. Now pause. What kind of economy thrives on that? What kind of politics manipulates that? What kind of culture sustains that? Welcome to the psychological machinery of modern life. It begins early. If you're not top of the class, you're average. If you're not gifted, you're forgettable. If you're not attractive by dominant standards, you become invisible. The cultural message is clear. Worth is comparative. Value is scarce. You're not measured by your humanity, you're measured by your marketability. And once this belief takes root, something subtle but devastating happens. You begin to view yourself as a product. You become your own brand. Your personality is polished. Your pain is edited. Your vulnerability is rehearsed. You stop asking, "Who am I?" and instead ask, "How am I being perceived?" This is where the deepest erosion occurs, because once you view your worth as something to be proved rather than inhabited, you fracture. You become to people the one you are and the one you must present. The longer you perform, the harder it becomes to tell the difference. This is what philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre called bad faith, when we live inauthentically, fleeing from our own freedom in exchange for social acceptance. But it doesn't stop with you. This fracture begins to shape everything around you, your relationships, your ambitions, your perception of others. You start to envy what you assume others feel: completeness, confidence, clarity. But you're not envying them. You're envying the mask they wear better than you. This is how society becomes a masquerade ball of suffering. And when everyone is faking, no one can heal, because healing requires truth, and truth requires risk. But how can you risk showing your real self when your worth has always felt conditional? It's a paradox. To be free, you must be real. But to be real, you must risk rejection. And when rejection feels like annihilation, you stay fake and call it survival. Let's go deeper. The sense of not enoughness doesn't just affect individuals. It shapes institutions. Consider capitalism not as an economic theory, but as a psychological climate. Its engine is discontent. Its fuel is desire. Its goal is endless growth. And how do you sustain endless growth? By making people believe they are always lacking something. By convincing them that satisfaction is just one purchase, one promotion, one milestone away. By ensuring that enough is a horizon that keeps moving so they never stop chasing. This is not an accident. It's a feature. You were trained to consume because you were trained to feel incomplete. Even education isn't immune. Instead of cultivating inner wisdom, schools often reward conformity and obedience. Creativity is boxed in. Curiosity is standardized. Failure is punished. And slowly, you internalize the idea that mistakes mean you're flawed, not learning. The result? A generation of adults who cannot rest, who measure their day in productivity, who collapse in guilt when they slow down, who confuse burnout with meaning, who chase success without ever stopping to ask success by whose definition. But the most tragic consequence: you begin to fear your own silence, because in the quiet, the questions return. Who am I without the validation? What if I stop trying to prove myself? What if this version of me, tired, imperfect, uncertain, is all there is? And that terrifies you, because you've never been taught to sit with that person. This fear, this chronic insufficiency, it creates societies that are anxious, distracted, lonely. It's the reason social media addiction is rampant, why imposter syndrome is normalized, why rest feels like failure. And worse, it's contagious. Parents pass it to children. Leaders instill it in followers. Institutions reinforce it through metrics, ranks, algorithms. The question is never, are you alive? It's how well are you performing aliveness? But here's the truth hiding in plain sight. No external achievement will ever resolve an internal absence. You can win every award and still feel like a fraud. You can be admired by thousands and still feel invisible. You can accumulate wealth, beauty, titles, and still hate the silence of your own mind. Why? Because what you're really starving for is not validation. It's integration, the ability to exist as one whole person, not a performance, not a product, not a persona, just you. And this is where the possibility of rebellion begins. But before you break free, you must understand just how deep the lie goes. How to break free, not by fixing yourself, but by unlearning the falsehoods that made you believe you were broken in the first place. See how real freedom doesn't come from achievement, but from the courage to reclaim who you were before the world taught you to feel unworthy. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff, not a physical one, but a psychological edge. Behind you is everything you've been taught to believe, the constant striving, the pressure to prove, the fear of being less than. In front of you, vast and uncertain, is something you've rarely tasted, self-acceptance without condition. Most people never jump, they stay behind the edge, walking circles in the familiar terrain of inadequacy. Because breaking free doesn't feel like empowerment. At first, it feels like betrayal, like you're betraying everything that once gave you a sense of worth, praise, performance, perfectionism. But rebellion doesn't always look like a fist in the air. Sometimes it looks like doing nothing on purpose. Sometimes it looks like saying, I'm tired, and not apologizing. Sometimes it looks like deleting the metrics, refusing the hustle, silencing the inner critic, not because you've failed, but because you've finally woken up. The first act of rebellion is this: you stop trying to be enough. You realize the whole pursuit was rigged. That enoughness was never a destination, only a distraction, a moving target that kept you busy, kept you distracted from the power you already had. Psychologist Carl Jung understood this deeply. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who the world rewards, not who your parents expected, not who your social media projects, but the self, the raw, unfiltered, integrated being beneath all the masks. To become this self, you must dismantle the lies." Lie number 1. Your worth is conditional. Truth. Your worth is inherent. The moment you were born, you were already worthy. No achievement can add to it. No failure can subtract from it. It simply is, like gravity, like breath. Lie number 2. You must constantly improve to be valuable. Truth. Growth is beautiful, but you don't have to earn love through it. You're not a self-help project. You're a living paradox, capable of change, yet already whole. Lie number 3. Everyone else has it figured out. Truth. Most people are faking certainty to survive. Their curated confidence is a costume stitched together by fear. You're not behind. You're just brave enough to see the truth. Once you stop feeding these lies, something radical happens. You begin to hear yourself again, not the performance version of you, but the quiet, messy, powerful self that's been waiting patiently underneath. This is the birth of self-compassion.com. It doesn't come with fireworks. It's not glamorous. In fact, it often looks disappointingly ordinary. You might cry in a parked car, or stare at the ceiling for hours, or walk through nature feeling both broken and free. But that's the revolution. Feeling without numbing, existing without proving. This shift is not just emotional, it's philosophical. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." But what if your why was never yours to begin with? What if your deepest motivations were borrowed from a sick culture? To rebel is to rewrite your why, not to escape suffering, but to choose suffering with meaning. That's where Viktor Frankl comes in, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist. Frankl discovered that even in the most inhumane conditions, the human spirit could endure if it had a sense of purpose rooted in the self, not the world's approval. Your rebellion, then, is not about ego. It's about essence. You stop running. You stop comparing. You start asking different questions. What would I do if no one were watching? What kind of life feels like home to me? Not impressive, but honest. Who am I when I'm not trying to win? These aren't just self-reflection prompts. They are doorways. And when you walk through them, you don't just change your mindset. You change your identity. Of course, this rebellion comes with resistance. You will disappoint people. You'll be misunderstood. You'll lose friends who only loved your mask. And for a while, it may feel like you've lost everything. But in losing the false, you create space for the real. You will discover people who love your rawness. You will attract spaces where you don't have to perform. You will feel moments of peace, not the passive kind, but the fierce peace that comes when you no longer owe the world your pain. And here's the most astonishing part. You'll begin to see that your brokenness was never the problem. Your sensitivity, your insecurity, your fear, they were never flaws. They were signals. They were proof that your soul was alive in a culture that numbs, that your heart refused to harden completely, that you were still against all odds human. This is the true rebellion, to be human in a world that profits from your alienation. You don't need more accolades. You don't need more followers. You don't need a better version of yourself. You need less noise, more silence, less self-improvement, more self-remembrance, less performance, more presence. The world will keep spinning. The machine will keep selling you inadequacy. But now you see it. You name it. You don't buy in. And when someone asks you what changed, you won't say, I finally became enough. You'll say, I stopped needing to. Imagine this. You're standing in front of a mirror, not the kind that flatters or distorts, but one that shows you as you are. No filters, no expectations. Just you, tired eyes, quiet strength, and spoken scars. And for the first time, you don't flinch. You don't criticize. You don't look away. You see yourself. And you realize something shocking. Something so simple yet so shattering it takes the breath out of your lungs. You were never broken. Not then, not now, not ever. What broke was the lens, the mirror, the story. You weren't not enough. You were simply convinced you had to be someone else to be loved. And that illusion, crafted by culture, childhood, comparison, was so convincing, so insidious, that you spent years, maybe decades, climbing ladders that led nowhere, performing roles that never fit, chasing a version of happiness that always dangled just out of reach. But now you see, the prison was never real. The chains were made of thoughts. And the key, you've been holding it the whole time. Here's the ultimate truth. Feeling not enough is not a flaw in you. It's a feature of the system you were born into. A system that thrives on dissatisfaction, that teaches you to consume your way to self-worth, that equates your value with productivity, beauty, followers, wealth, obedience. And here's the deeper cut. The moment you feel truly at peace, the system loses power. You stop buying. You stop chasing. You become ungovernable, not by rage, but by wholeness. That's why it keeps whispering, you're almost there. Just a little more. Then you'll matter. But you're done listening. Because now you know, wholeness is not something you achieve. It's something you remember. You were born whole, before shame touched your skin. Before performance buried your play, before fear dimmed your light. You didn't need to be fixed. You needed to be found. And the one who finds you is you. This realization changes everything. You begin to reimagine success not as dominance or status, but as depth, as alignment, as living a life that feels like your own. Not a borrowed dream or a curated high like Rio. You redefine healing not as returning to who you were before the pain, but as becoming someone wiser, softer, braver because of it. You understand now why the pain had to happen, why the longing, the ache, the not enoughness, why they had a place. Because they cracked you open. They made you question. And in that questioning, you found the beginning of truth, the final truth. You were never meant to be perfect. You were meant to be real. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start asking, what happened to me? What stories did I inherit that taught me to hate my softness, my slowness, my silence? And you begin rewriting. You walk away from relationships that require you to shrink. You choose rest over hustle, knowing your worth doesn't decay with stillness. You show up in your messiness, not as a liability, but as proof that you're awake. You become a sanctuary for yourself and for others, because the moment you stop pretending to be enough, you give others permission to do the same. You realize the goal was never to become better, it was to become truer, and that is the final, most powerful realization.